Mitzi Young, and I am chair of the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island. While I am so happy so many have joined us this evening, I am sad that we have arrived at this point in our community where a conversation like this is needed. The Jewish community has unfortunately been a target of anti-Semitism for generations. However, the recent increase is undeniable and alarming. I'm proud of the ongoing work of the Jewish Alliance to support security needs across our Jewish community. However, we know there is more to be done. And as I think about things now, I think we are living in a new normal. Any behavior is okay. Anything one says is okay. And I personally, as I'm sure many of you in this room feel, that when I'm with a group of people, probably not my closest friends, I feel a slight edge of anti-Semitism. I'm sure it's been the same for many of you. So hopefully we will get back to maybe an old normal so our children and our grandchildren won't have to deal with this. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the President of the Board of Rabbis of Greater Rhode Island, Rabbi Sarah Mack, who will introduce our program.
Thank you, Mitzi. When Stephanie invited me to reflect on this moment, there are many opportunities in history when we as a people have faced anti-Semitism to reflect upon. But I found myself drawn to a time at the beginning of the 20th century that was particularly difficult for Eastern European Jewry. At that time, many of you may know, a wave of pogroms swept across the land, killing and injuring thousands of Jews. The most well-known is the Kishinev pogrom of 1903. But we should all be aware that well before the Nazi menace, this was an incredibly traumatic time for the Jewish people. In response to that hatred, in response to the anti-Semitism and the tumult and the violence, the intellectuals of the time animated a heated debate on the pages of leading Jewish journals. They raised a commotion asking a question about what they called She'elat Kiyum HaYahadut, the future survival of the Jewish people. The tremendous pain and suffering that they felt, incurred simply for being Jewish, caused them to ask the question, why be Jewish? In fact, it was such a debate that in 1904 a cash prize was offered to anyone who could formulate a statement to logically compel those Jews with doubts why they should continue to be part of the Jewish people. And in fact, all the famous thinkers of the time responded. Writers, philosophers, academics, all had something to say, as Jewish communities are wont to do. I wish I could tell you that there was one brilliant thinker who had an answer to this question. But alas, in the end, in this historical moment, no one won that contest. I bring this story to your attention tonight because I believe it is essentially important how we answer that question today in the face of our current challenges. I have often shared this story with my confirmation students, 10th graders who are affirming their desire to be Jewish in a less than perfect world. I share it with them as I share it with you tonight because I believe that the best answer to anti-Semitism is an affirmation of Jewish life, of Jewish learning, of Jewish observance, and Jewish community. If we answer the question, why be Jewish, with anti-Semitism as our sole response, as our sole identity, if response to hatred is the foundation of our faith, we are missing out on what is so deeply important about being Jewish. Indeed, embracing the values that our tradition holds dear, to care for the vulnerable, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, love our neighbor. Those are values that are yet another way we can stand against the hatred that plagues our time. At Brandeis University, my alma mater's commencement this year, renowned scholar of anti-Semitism Deborah Lipstadt reminded graduates, we must recognize that we cannot be against just one ism to the exclusion of all others, she told them. You cannot be a fighter against anti-Semitism, but be blind to racism, or even worse, engage in it yourself. And so as we gather on this day, following a painful year, we commit together to shine a light on the dark crevices of white supremacy, racism, and anti-Jewish hatred that have infected our nation and the world. And we commit to not letting this hatred define our Jewish selves, as we continue to work together to build a vibrant, joyful, and meaningful observance of Jewish life and values with hope in a better future that is perhaps the strongest rebuke of all. We are grateful to have with us tonight an incredibly wonderful panel, as well as Robert Trestan, the Executive Director of the Anti-Defamation League's Boston office. So first I will introduce Robert, invite him to come forward, lay the foundation for our evening before we then invite our panelists to join us on, I guess it's not a bima, I guess I should, on the stage here. Robert Trestan, as I said, is the Executive Director of the ADL's Boston office. He has represented the ADL at the White House Summit on Countering Violence Extremism, where he raised concerns that anti-Semitism remains at the core of extremist ideology. In Europe, Robert is part of an international team of prosecutors and hate crime trainers who provide support to various countries. And internationally, he has also consulted on hate crimes and legislative advocacy to NGOs and civil society groups in Austria, Israel, Poland, and Turkey. His expert commentary on civil rights, extremism, and anti-Semitism has appeared in many major news outlets, and I know all of us were grateful for his voice most recently in our own community with the desecration of the Hebrew cemetery of Fall River. Robert?